Brute on bike punches 60-year-old woman. 4 firefighters make him regret it.
The late autumn sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Eileen Matthews adjusted her wool scarf against the crisp afternoon breeze. At 60, she had grown to appreciate these solitary walks through her neighborhood, each step a quiet celebration of the life she'd built here over the past 3 decades. The familiar storefronts that lined the street had become old friends. Henderson's Bakery, where the scent of fresh sourdough still wafted through the air, Morrison's Hardware, its windows displaying seasonal garden tools, and the Crown Street Fire Station, its red brick facade weathered but proud. Today, the sidewalks gleamed from an earlier drizzle, and the remnants of fallen leaves created abstract patterns against the concrete. Eileen's sensible walking shoes made soft tapping sounds as she moved at her usual unhurried pace, her silver hair neatly tucked beneath a navy blue beret. She'd chosen this route specifically for its blend of residential charm and commercial activity, appreciating how the two seemed to complement each other perfectly. The fire station had always given her a sense of security. Its presence was like a steadfast guardian, and she'd often exchanged friendly waves with the firefighters who maintained their equipment in the wide bay doors. Today was no different. She could see several of them outside, their navy uniforms crisp despite the casual nature of their break time. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, nodded in greeting as she passed. The weight of her canvas shopping bag, containing a new novel from the bookshop 3 blocks back, swung gently against her hip. Eileen had been looking forward to this particular book for weeks, a historical mystery set in Victorian London. The thought of settling into a reading chair with a cup of Earl Grey tea later that afternoon brought a small smile to her face. She was so absorbed in her pleasant thoughts that she didn't immediately register the sound of rapidly approaching bicycle wheels. The first indication that something was wrong came as a shadow suddenly loomed in her peripheral vision, moving too fast and too close. Eileen's heart jumped as she turned her head, catching sight of a man on a bicycle swerving deliberately toward her. Time seemed to slow down as she processed his appearance, a gaunt face twisted with malice, dark eyes burning with an inexplicable rage, and hands gripping the handlebars with white-knuckled intensity. He couldn't have been more than 30, wearing a black hoodie that seemed to absorb all light, making him appear like a void moving through space. Before Eileen could fully comprehend what was happening, before she could step away or cry out, the man's right fist shot out with devastating precision. The impact caught her completely off guard, striking her temple with enough force to send her world spinning. Her legs, always so steady during her daily walks, betrayed her as they buckled beneath her weight. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion, yet she was powerless to stop it. Her shopping bag went flying, the new book skittering across the wet pavement like a startled animal. Eileen's palms instinctively went out to break her fall, but the momentum was too great. She felt the rough scrape of concrete against her skin, followed by a sharp pain in her hip as she landed awkwardly on her side. The world continued to spin as she lay there, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just occurred. The peaceful afternoon had shattered like glass, leaving her surrounded by the sharp edges of reality. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the sound of bicycle wheels continuing to move, accompanied by a harsh laugh that seemed to mock her vulnerability. Confusion gave way to fear as she tried to push herself up, her palms stinging from their contact with the pavement. Her vision swam, and she could feel a warm trickle along her temple where the man's fist had connected. The thought that this could happen here, on her street, in broad daylight, seemed impossible. Yet the pain was real, the fear was real, and the sound of that cruel laughter lingering in the air was terrifyingly real. Above her, the sky continued its peaceful drift of clouds, oblivious to the violence that had just transpired below. Eileen could hear voices now, shouting from the direction of the fire station. They seemed distant, as if coming from underwater, but they were moving closer. Her world had tilted on its axis, and she wasn't sure if it would ever right itself again. The attacker's face bore an expression of smug satisfaction as he began to pedal away, convinced of his easy escape. His black hoodie billowed slightly in the wind of his movement, creating an ominous silhouette against the afternoon sky. He hadn't counted on witnesses, hadn't bothered to check his surroundings before striking. Such was his arrogance that he believed he could commit this act of violence with impunity, just another predator taking advantage of what he perceived as easy prey. But fate had other plans, and justice wore navy blue uniforms that day. The 4 firefighters who had been enjoying their brief respite from duties had witnessed everything from their vantage point near the station's entrance. They had seen the deliberate swerve, the calculated strike, and the cruel aftermath of Eileen's fall. Their reactions were instantaneous, born from years of training, and a deeply ingrained sense of duty that extended far beyond fighting fires. The youngest of the group, Michael Chen, was already sprinting toward Eileen before her attacker had fully turned his bike around. His medical training kicked in automatically as he assessed her condition from a distance, noting her position and the visible signs of injury. The other 3 firefighters, James Rodriguez, Sarah Mitchell, and Marcus Thompson, moved with equally purposeful speed, their break forgotten in the face of this emergency. "Call it in," James shouted over his shoulder as he began his pursuit, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making split-second decisions. Sarah had already pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the keypad as she reported the incident while keeping pace with her colleagues. The coordination between them was seamless, a dance they had perfected through countless emergency responses. Marcus, a former track athlete whose speed had served him well in both sports and his chosen profession, took point in the pursuit. His powerful strides ate up the distance between him and the fleeing cyclist, while James flanked to the left, anticipating possible escape routes. The attacker, hearing the commotion behind him, glanced back with that same twisted smile, though it began to falter as he realized the determination of his pursuers. Back at the scene, Michael had reached Eileen's side, his approach professional yet gentle. "Ma'am, I'm a firefighter. Please don't try to move just yet. Can you tell me your name?" His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he performed a quick assessment of her vital signs and visible injuries. The cut on her temple was bleeding, but the flow was already slowing. More concerning was the dazed look in her eyes and the way she held her right hip. Eileen's voice trembled as she responded, "I'm Eileen Matthews. I don't understand. Why would he?" Her words trailed off as shock began to set in, her body shaking slightly despite the mild temperature. Michael removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, all while maintaining a steady stream of reassuring conversation. "You're safe now, Mrs. Matthews. My colleagues are in pursuit, and the police are on their way. Can you tell me if you hit your head when you fell?" His questions were strategic, designed both to assess her condition and keep her focused, preventing her from slipping deeper into shock. Sarah, who had completed her call to emergency services, joined them with a first aid kit from the station. Meanwhile, the chase was intensifying. The attacker had underestimated both the speed and the determination of his pursuers. His bicycle, while initially giving him an advantage, was proving less maneuverable than he'd hoped on the crowded sidewalk. Pedestrians, alerted by the shouting and commotion, began to move out of the way, some pointing and others pulling out phones to record the unfolding drama. James and Marcus had developed a strategy without needing to speak. They separated slightly, forcing the cyclist to choose between them as potential threats. The man's confidence was visibly eroding, replaced by a desperate edge to his movements as he realized these weren't ordinary citizens he could easily evade. These were trained professionals who had dedicated their lives to protecting others, and they were gaining on him with every passing second. The sound of approaching sirens began to fill the air, adding to the tension of the moment. The attacker's face contorted with growing panic as he realized his simple act of cruelty was spiraling far beyond his control. His world was shrinking with each pedal stroke, the space between him and his pursuers diminishing despite his increasingly frantic efforts to escape. The chase reached its climax at the intersection of Maple and Oak Streets, where the afternoon traffic had created a natural bottleneck. Daniel Biggs, his face now sheened with sweat and twisted with desperation, found himself running out of options. The firefighters had executed their pursuit with tactical precision, forcing him toward this choke point while maintaining steady pressure from multiple angles. Marcus Thompson's powerful stride had eaten away most of the distance between them, while James Rodriguez had managed to circle around through an alley, emerging ahead of Biggs's projected path. The trap was closing, and Biggs knew it. His bicycle, a beaten-up mountain bike that had served as his getaway vehicle in previous crimes, skidded as he made a sharp turn to avoid James, the tires leaving dark streaks on the wet pavement. The gathering crowd of onlookers created an impromptu arena, their presence both helping and hindering the pursuit. They formed natural barriers that limited Biggs's escape routes, but their phones and excited chatter added an element of chaos to the scene. Some shouted encouragement to the firefighters, while others pressed themselves against storefront windows, unwilling to miss the drama unfolding before them. Biggs's final attempt at escape came as he tried to thread his bike between a parked delivery van and a newspaper stand. The gap proved too narrow, and his handlebar caught the corner of the stand, sending magazines cascading onto the sidewalk. The collision forced him to dismount, the bike clattering to the ground as he stumbled forward, catching himself against the van's side panel. The firefighters seized this moment. Marcus closed in from behind, while James approached from the front, their movements coordinated through years of working together in high-pressure situations. Biggs spun around, his back pressed against the van, eyes darting between his pursuers like a cornered animal. The facade of the confident predator had completely crumbled, replaced by something more primal and dangerous. "It's over," James called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed in crisis situations. "Don't make this worse than it already is." But Biggs wasn't ready to surrender. His hand disappeared into his hoodie pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment, everyone braced for the possibility of a weapon. Instead, he withdrew his empty fist and took up a boxer's stance, his movements suggesting some formal training in hand-to-hand combat. "You should have minded your own business," Biggs snarled, his voice carrying a hint of something beyond mere anger, a deep-seated resentment against authority, against society, against everything these firefighters represented. That old lady probably had it coming anyway. The statement revealed volumes about his character, and the firefighters' expressions hardened. They had seen his type before, individuals who justified their cruelty through a warped lens of self-righteousness. Marcus moved slightly to his left, maintaining the triangulation that would prevent escape while preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Biggs struck first, launching himself at James with a surprisingly technical combination of punches. His form suggested experience in street fights, each movement calculated despite his desperate situation. James managed to deflect the first two strikes, but the third caught him just above his left eye, the impact producing an audible thud that drew gasps from the onlooking crowd. But James had been in tough situations before, and this was far from his first confrontation with a violent individual. He absorbed the blow without backing down, his training kicking in as he moved to grapple with Biggs. Marcus seized the opportunity to close in from behind, and together they began the delicate process of subduing someone who had nothing left to lose. The struggle was intense but brief. Biggs fought with the ferocity of someone facing their third strike, each movement designed to inflict maximum damage. He managed to land several more blows, but the firefighters' teamwork proved insurmountable. Their experience in handling emergency situations, combined with their physical conditioning, gave them a decisive advantage. The firefighters worked in perfect synchronization, their movements reflecting countless hours of training together. When Biggs attempted to break free from James's grip, Marcus was there to counter his momentum. When he tried to use his lower center of gravity to his advantage, their combined strength neutralized any advantage he might have had. The crowd had grown larger, their phones recording every moment of the struggle. Some shouted advice or encouragement, while others maintained a tense silence, understanding they were witnessing something beyond mere street theater. This was justice in action, raw and immediate, carried out by men who had sworn to protect their community. Biggs's resistance began to falter as fatigue set in. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate energy of someone who knew they were fighting a losing battle. His punches became wilder, less coordinated, each one eating away at what remained of his stamina. The firefighters maintained their professional composure, using controlled techniques to gradually wear him down. Through it all, James and Marcus communicated with short, efficient phrases, coordinating their efforts without taking their attention off their dangerous opponent. Their training in handling emergency situations proved invaluable as they worked to subdue Biggs without causing unnecessary harm to him or themselves. "Watch his right," James called out as Biggs attempted another desperate swing. Marcus responded instantly, shifting his position to block the attempted strike while maintaining his grip on Biggs's other arm. The coordination between them was seamless, each movement supporting the other's efforts. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, indicating that backup was nearly there. This seemed to trigger a final surge of desperate energy in Biggs. He thrashed violently, managing to break one arm free, and used it to deliver a glancing blow to Marcus's ribs. The firefighter grunted but maintained his hold, knowing that letting go now could put everyone at risk. James seized the opportunity created by Biggs's focus on Marcus, stepping in to execute a controlled takedown maneuver. The movement was precise, practiced, and effective. Biggs's feet left the ground for a brief moment before he found himself face down on the wet pavement, both firefighters working to secure his arms behind his back. Even then, Biggs continued to struggle, his face pressed against the concrete as he spat out threats and accusations. "This is assault," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage and exertion. "You can't do this to me. I know my rights." The firefighters remained professional, maintaining their hold while being careful not to use excessive force. Their breathing was heavy from the exertion, but their grips remained steady. James's eye was already beginning to swell where Biggs had struck him, but his focus never wavered. Around them, the crowd had formed a loose circle, their phones still recording every moment. Some were already sharing the video on social media, ensuring that Biggs's actions, both the initial attack on Eileen and his subsequent resistance, would be well documented. The community's involvement, even as passive observers, added another layer of accountability to the situation. The first police car arrived just as Biggs's resistance began to truly fade, its lights painting the scene in alternating flashes of blue and red. Two officers emerged quickly, taking in the situation with professional assessment. They approached cautiously, their training evident in every movement as they moved to take control of the situation from the firefighters. The police officers approached with practiced efficiency, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Officer Sarah Chun and her partner, Detective Mark Robertson, had responded to the emergency call with urgency, recognizing the address as being within a usually peaceful sector of their beat. The scene that greeted them was like a tableau. Two firefighters restraining a struggling man, a crowd of onlookers with phones raised, and the scattered debris of the confrontation strewn across the wet pavement. Detective Robertson's expression shifted subtly as he drew closer, recognition dawning in his eyes. He had encountered Daniel Biggs before, during investigations of similar incidents across the district. The detective's hand instinctively moved to the handcuffs on his belt as he approached, his voice carrying the weight of authority as he announced their presence. "Police, everyone stay where you are." The command was unnecessary but procedural, helping to establish control over the situation. Officer Chun had already begun moving through the crowd, creating space and gathering initial statements from witnesses who were eager to share what they had seen. James and Marcus maintained their hold on Biggs, their arms steady despite the fatigue of the prolonged struggle. Sweat glistened on their foreheads, and James's eye had swollen significantly where Biggs had struck him, but their grips never wavered. They waited for the officers to reach them before making any moves to transfer custody. "He's been consistently resistant," James reported professionally, his breathing still heavy from exertion. "Attacked an elderly woman about 2 blocks back. Our colleagues are with her now. Subject has demonstrated combat training and has landed several strikes." Detective Robertson nodded, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. "We know Mr. Biggs," he replied, a hint of resignation in his voice. "This isn't his first afternoon of making poor decisions." He knelt beside the restrained man, maintaining a safe distance while establishing eye contact. "Daniel Biggs, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As Robertson recited the Miranda rights, Officer Chin coordinated with dispatch, requesting additional units and emergency medical services for both the original victim and any injuries sustained during the apprehension. The gathered crowd began to thin slightly, though many remained, their phones still recording every detail of the unfolding scene. The transfer of custody was executed with precise coordination. On Robertson's count, the firefighters smoothly transferred their hold to the officers, who quickly secured Biggs with handcuffs. Despite his exhaustion, Biggs couldn't resist one final act of defiance, spitting in James's direction as he was pulled to his feet. "You're just making it worse for yourself, Mr. Biggs," Robertson commented calmly, securing the handcuffs with professional efficiency. The detective's tone carried the weariness of someone who had seen this pattern too many times before. Assaulting emergency personnel adds significant charges to your situation. Officer Chun had begun documenting the scene, her camera capturing images of the scattered evidence, the abandoned bicycle, the scuff marks on the pavement, the displaced newspaper stand. Each detail would help build the case against Biggs, though the multitude of witness videos would prove even more valuable in the prosecution to come. Back at the original scene of the attack, Eileen Matthews had regained some of her composure, though she remained shaken. Michael Chun, the firefighter who had stayed with her, had provided excellent care, keeping her calm and stable while monitoring her condition. The arrival of paramedics had brought additional support, and they were now carefully assessing her injuries. When Officer Chun approached to take her statement, Eileen's voice trembled but remained clear. "I want to press charges," she stated firmly, her hand gripping the emergency blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I want to prevent him from doing this to anyone else." The determination in her voice belied her physical appearance, showing a strength that her attacker had severely underestimated. The scene transformed into a hub of coordinated professional activity. Additional police units arrived, establishing a perimeter and beginning the methodical process of evidence collection. The firefighters who had pursued and apprehended Biggs provided detailed statements, their training evident in the precise, chronological manner in which they recounted events. James Rodriguez sat still as a paramedic examined his swollen eye, the bruising now more pronounced against his tanned skin. "I need this documented," he insisted, even as the paramedic suggested immediate transport to the hospital. "This needs to be part of the official record." His dedication to proper procedure reflected years of experience in emergency services, understanding how important documentation could be in ensuring justice. Detective Robertson had begun piecing together the larger picture, his notebook filling with details that connected this incident to other recent attacks in the area. Biggs, now secured in the back of a patrol car, had fallen into a sullen silence, his earlier bravado replaced by the realization of his situation. The detective's investigation took on additional urgency as reports from dispatch revealed a pattern of similar attacks across 3 neighboring districts. Each incident shared striking similarities: a lone assailant on a bicycle, seemingly random targets, and a level of violence that appeared designed to instill fear rather than facilitate theft. Officer Chin coordinated with a forensics team that had arrived on scene, ensuring that every detail was properly documented. The bicycle, which Biggs had abandoned during the confrontation, was photographed and processed for fingerprints. Though they already had their perpetrator in custody, proper procedure demanded thorough documentation of all evidence. The crowd had thinned considerably, but those who remained were eager to share their videos with law enforcement. Officer Chen organized this effort, collecting contact information and establishing a digital evidence submission protocol. The modern era of smartphone documentation had created new challenges for law enforcement, but also provided unprecedented levels of evidence for prosecution. As the scene continued to be processed, Eileen Matthews was carefully helped into an ambulance for transport to the local hospital. Her injuries, while not life-threatening, required proper medical evaluation and treatment. Before the doors closed, she reached out to grasp James's hand, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of emotion. "All of you. I don't want to think about what might have happened if you hadn't been there." James squeezed her hand gently, his professional demeanor softening for a moment as he assured her that they were just doing their job. Detective Robertson watched the ambulance depart, his expression thoughtful. In his 20 years on the force, he had seen countless incidents of random violence, but something about this case struck a particularly resonant chord. Perhaps it was the seamless cooperation between emergency services or the community's immediate rally to support the victim, but he sensed that this case would leave a lasting impact on the neighborhood. The detective's phone buzzed with an update from the station. Biggs's record had been pulled, revealing a history more extensive than initially suspected. Multiple assault charges, several restraining orders, and a pattern of escalating violence painted a disturbing picture. This afternoon's attack represented not just a single act of violence, but potentially the latest in a series of incidents that had terrorized the community. The fluorescent lights of the police station's interview room cast harsh shadows across Daniel Biggs's face as Detective Robertson spread photographs across the metal table. Each image told a similar story: injured victims, scattered belongings, and the distinctive tire marks of a bicycle fleeing the scene. The pattern was unmistakable, and with each new piece of evidence, the weight of Biggs's crimes grew heavier. 6 attacks in the past month alone, Robertson stated, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of contained anger. All of them targeting vulnerable individuals. All of them showing the same level of calculated violence. He placed another photograph on the table, this one showing Eileen Matthews being loaded into the ambulance, her face pale against the emergency blanket. Biggs maintained his silence, but his body language spoke volumes. The slight twitch of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, these were the tells of someone watching their carefully constructed world unravel. The bravado he had displayed during the attack and subsequent chase had evaporated under the stark reality of consequences. In another room, Officer Chin was conducting a deep dive into Biggs's background, uncovering a history that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. His criminal record began in his teens with minor infractions, but the progression showed a clear escalation in both frequency and severity of offenses. Restraining orders from 3 different counties suggested a pattern of targeting individuals who had crossed his path. The investigation expanded beyond local jurisdictions as other departments began responding to inquiries about similar incidents. A detective from a neighboring city recognized Biggs's description from an unsolved case involving an attack on a retired schoolteacher. The pieces were fitting together, revealing a predator who had managed to stay just ahead of law enforcement by moving between districts. Back at the hospital, Eileen Matthews sat with a victim advocate as she provided a detailed statement of the attack. Her initial shock had given way to a quiet determination to see justice done. The bruising on her temple had darkened, and her hip would require physical therapy, but her spirit remained unbroken. He seemed to enjoy it, she recalled, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The look in his eyes, he wasn't just angry. He was taking pleasure in causing fear and pain. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued, each detail adding to the mounting evidence against her attacker. The advocate, Lisa Torres, had seen countless cases of random violence in her 15 years of service, but something about Eileen's attack struck a particular chord. Perhaps it was the brazen nature of the assault, carried out in broad daylight on a busy street, or maybe it was the way the community had rallied in response. Either way, she found herself particularly invested in ensuring Eileen received the support she needed. As evening approached, the investigation continued to uncover new connections. A search warrant executed at Biggs's apartment revealed a troubling collection of newspaper clippings detailing various assaults across the region. Some of the articles had been annotated with handwritten notes, suggesting a level of premeditation that elevated the severity of his crimes. The firefighters who had apprehended Biggs provided detailed statements, their professional training evident in the precision of their accounts. James Rodriguez's injured eye had been properly documented and treated, adding another charge to the growing list of offenses. The emergency response community had closed ranks around their own, demonstrating the deep bonds that existed between those who served the public. The district attorney's office took immediate interest in the case, recognizing its significance beyond the immediate charges. Assistant DA Sarah Martinez reviewed the mounting evidence with growing concern, seeing in Biggs's pattern of behavior the potential for even more serious crimes had he not been stopped. "We're looking at multiple felony counts," she explained to Detective Robertson during their late-night case review. the premeditation evident in his selection of victims, the escalating violence, the assault on emergency personnel. This isn't just a simple assault case anymore. The investigation expanded to include digital forensics as technicians examined Biggs's phone and computer. His online presence revealed a disturbing fascination with videos of street violence, particularly attacks on vulnerable individuals. Comment histories showed him engaging with like-minded individuals, sharing techniques, and encouraging escalation. Local news media had picked up the story, focusing not just on the attack itself, but on the remarkable response of the firefighters and the community. The security camera footage from nearby businesses had been enhanced, clearly showing the calculated nature of Biggs's attack and the swift response of the emergency personnel. The story resonated particularly strongly with other first responders in the area. The fire station had received numerous calls of support from other departments, each expressing solidarity with their colleagues who had intervened. The incident served as a powerful reminder of their role not just in emergency response, but in maintaining the safety and security of their community. Mental health professionals who reviewed Biggs's history noted a pattern consistent with antisocial personality disorder, marked by a complete lack of empathy and an escalating need for control and dominance. His choice of victims, primarily older adults and individuals he perceived as vulnerable, suggested a calculated approach to his violence. As the evidence mounted, investigators discovered connections to several cold cases in neighboring counties. The pattern was consistent: a seemingly random attack, a bicycle-mounted escape, and victims chosen for their perceived vulnerability. Each incident had occurred during daylight hours in well-trafficked areas, suggesting a boldness that had grown with each successful attack. The community's response to the investigation was overwhelming. Numerous individuals came forward with additional security camera footage, previous encounters with Biggs, and accounts of suspicious behavior that had gone unreported. Each piece of information helped build a more complete picture of a predator who had operated in their midst. Social workers who had encountered Biggs through various programs noted his resistance to intervention and support services. Reports documented a pattern of manipulation and surface-level compliance, masking a deeper refusal to acknowledge the impact of his actions or accept responsibility for their consequences. The investigation also revealed the ripple effects of Biggs's actions throughout the community. Other elderly residents expressed increased anxiety about walking alone, and local neighborhood watch groups reported a surge in participation. The attack had shattered the sense of security many had taken for granted, but it had also awakened a renewed commitment to community vigilance. 3 weeks after the attack, the Crown Street Community Center buzzed with activity as residents gathered for the first Neighborhood Safety Summit. Eileen Matthews, still walking with a slight limp but standing tall, took her place at the podium. The bruising on her temple had faded to a yellowish shadow, but the determination in her eyes burned brighter than ever. "What happened to me could have left me afraid," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "Instead, it showed me the incredible strength of our community." Her gaze swept across the audience, lingering on the row of firefighters seated near the front, James Rodriguez among them, the faint scar above his eye a testament to that afternoon's events. The meeting room had been arranged to accommodate over 200 residents, but people continued to stream in, lining the walls and clustering in the doorways. Local business owners, school teachers, medical professionals, and families filled every available space, their presence a powerful statement about the community's unity in the face of violence. Sarah Mitchell, the firefighter who had helped coordinate the pursuit of Biggs, had worked with Eileen to organize the summit. Together, they had created a comprehensive agenda that went beyond mere reaction to crime. The focus was on proactive measures, improving neighborhood watch programs, establishing emergency response protocols, and strengthening the bonds between residents and first responders. "What we witnessed that day wasn't just about catching a criminal," Sarah explained to the gathered crowd. "It was about understanding that community safety is a shared responsibility." She outlined new initiatives for community engagement, including regular training sessions on personal safety and emergency response procedures. The impact of the attack had rippled through the neighborhood in unexpected ways. Local businesses had come together to fund additional security cameras and improved lighting along popular walking routes. The hardware store had started offering free safety assessments for elderly residents, while the local gym had introduced self-defense classes specifically designed for seniors. James Rodriguez, despite his initial reluctance to be in the spotlight, shared his perspective on the importance of community vigilance. "We're trained to respond to emergencies," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "But the real strength of a community lies in preventing them from happening in the first place." His words resonated with the audience, many of whom had watched the video of his confrontation with Biggs. The fire station had become a symbol of community resilience. Regular open houses were now scheduled, allowing residents to meet the firefighters who served their neighborhood. Children brought thank you cards and drawings, while elderly residents often stopped by with home-baked goods and words of gratitude. What had once been a simple emergency service facility had transformed into a cornerstone of community engagement. Detective Robertson attended the summit, providing updates on the case against Biggs and offering insights into recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior. The investigation had led to the resolution of several cold cases, bringing closure to other victims and their families. His presence reminded everyone that law enforcement was an integral part of the community's support system. Eileen's role in the community's transformation surprised even her. The woman who had once simply enjoyed quiet afternoon walks had become an advocate for neighborhood safety and community connection. Her experience had awakened a leadership quality she hadn't known she possessed, and her genuine concern for others' well-being made her a natural bridge between various community groups. The summit gave birth to several ongoing initiatives. A neighborhood walking group, led by Eileen 3 times a week, combined exercise with community surveillance. Retired veterans, teachers, and other community members took turns leading the walks, sharing their knowledge of the neighborhood and its history while maintaining vigilant eyes on their surroundings. Local schools incorporated safety awareness into their curriculum, with firefighters and police officers regularly visiting classrooms to build positive relationships with young residents. Children learned not just about personal safety, but about the importance of community involvement and looking out for one another. The lessons extended beyond the classroom, influencing family discussions and neighborhood interactions. The technology community contributed as well, developing a neighborhood watch app that allowed residents to easily report suspicious activity and coordinate response efforts. The app included emergency contact information, safe route mapping, and direct links to local emergency services. It became a model for other communities seeking to modernize their safety programs. 6 months after the attack, the neighborhood hosted a Community Appreciation Day for first responders. The event, held in the park near the fire station, drew hundreds of residents. Food trucks lined the streets, local bands provided entertainment, and children participated in junior firefighter demonstrations. The atmosphere was one of celebration rather than fear, marking how far the community had come in its healing process. Eileen's physical therapy sessions had become informal community gatherings, as other seniors joined her in exercises designed to build strength and confidence. The physical therapist, noticing the positive impact of group support, developed a specialized program that combined rehabilitation with social interaction and safety awareness training. The firefighters who had apprehended Biggs remained humble about their role, but their actions had inspired a new generation of community servants. Applications to emergency service training programs increased significantly, with many citing the incident as their motivation to serve. The fire station established a youth mentorship program, nurturing this growing interest in public service. Legal proceedings against Biggs continued, with each court session attended by community members showing support for victims and first responders alike. The case became a catalyst for legislative change, leading to increased penalties for attacks on vulnerable individuals and emergency personnel. Eileen's testimony before the state legislature helped secure passage of these enhanced protection measures. 1 year after the attack, the community gathered again, this time for the dedication of a new safety center adjacent to the fire station. The facility, funded through community donations and local business contributions, would serve as a hub for safety education, emergency response training, and community outreach programs. Eileen, standing beside the firefighters who had come to her aid that day, cut the ribbon to officially open the center. The most profound changes, however, were visible in the daily life of the neighborhood. Residents knew each other by name, looked out for one another's children, and maintained an active presence in community affairs. The sense of vulnerability that had followed the attack had been replaced by a resilient network of neighbors supporting neighbors. As Eileen completed another neighborhood walk, now surrounded by friends and fellow community members, she reflected on how a moment of violence had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened her community. The sight of children playing freely in their front yards, elderly residents chatting on porches, and neighbors greeting each other with genuine warmth confirmed that while the incident had left its mark, it had not defined them. Instead, it had revealed the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to come together, protect one another, and build something stronger from adversity. The Crown Street Fire Station remained a steadfast presence in the neighborhood, its doors always open to the community it served. The firefighters who had demonstrated such courage continued their daily duties, now deeply integrated into the fabric of neighborhood life. Their actions had not only stopped a predator, but had helped forge a community that stood as a model of resilience, unity, and active citizenship.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.